People inside Vladimir Putin's inner circle are already moving for what comes next. Senior officials in the Kremlin behave as if time is short, with early asset moves and early protection buying. Self preservation now drives decisions, with loyal networks secured and money parked early. The motive changes first, and then the money follows. But inside the Kremlin, the fight is already visible in behavior. Speeches keep going, but the behavior has clearly changed. Cash gets moved, protection gets purchased, and loyalty gets tested. Follow the money because it is where the action is. And we're seeing right now that the most dangerous moment for any authoritarian regime isn't when a leader leaves, it's when the inner circle stops believing in the future. And in Moscow right now, the Kremlin succession fight has already begun. Senior officials aren't waiting for a signal or waiting to hear there's going to be a change. They themselves are already quietly moving assets and locking in security service loyalties. They know that there are no rules right now. And when the rules of power are unwritten, the first one to move wins. And this is how the post-Putin power map is being drawn up today, behind closed doors and in total silence. I am Dr. Jason Smart. I'm a national security advisor and a Kiev Post special correspondent. For Russia, we are watching as strikes are punishing their military. We're seeing that the sanctions are draining their economy. But taking away that money also means that the elites are left fighting for shrinking resources. And though the Kremlin tries to behave that all is fine, that there's no stress at all, we know that's not the case. Loyalties are being tested. And that's why today the Kremlin is scrambling to keep things moving, to make it look like everything is fine. So be on top of helping us break the Kremlin's falsehoods and to break into the mainstream media. Subscribe now. Help us reach our goal of 275,000 people who support Ukraine. And if you have YouTube's new rolling out the hypes, please, you get 3 of them for free. Give one, use one for this video. Subscribing, hyping, tell the algorithm that you want serious analysis, not low information noise. And if you want to support this on a ground level, please consider becoming a channel member today. So a Kremlin succession cycle, which is currently going, has begun. And one of the first steps in that is when the elites stop trusting rules and start trusting only cash. If you want to know when a regime is in trouble, don't look at the speeches. Pay attention to the shadow budget. And right now, billions are flowing through Russia's secret finance networks, bypassing official oversight to fund a private power struggle. And this isn't just about the war. It's about succession insurance. When the Kremlin elites start moving their own exit capital into shadow accounts, it means they no longer trust the system can protect them. And the economic fracturing of the Kremlin is clearly taking place. We're watching right now as the elites are using the levers of the law to crush their opponents. We are seeing how contracts are being divvied up as loyalty tests. And right now this is all happening in private rooms, far from the public eye. But cash moves first because movement is quiet and it's fast. And when the elites move money into the dark, that means they stopped waiting and they've started grabbing. They realize that time is short. And there's a reason time is short. Look at January 2026. Oil and gas revenues fell to about $5.1 billion. That's the lowest since July 2020. Keep in mind, July 2020 was the pandemic era. So there's another factor though as well. And that's the fact that today, Urals is being sold at around $24 per barrel. That's the major type of oil that Russia has. But right now, it's selling it at a massive discount. Now, neither here nor there. Today, Russia is making money off of oil and gas, over $1 billion a week, in fact. But that's not enough for everyone. Russia needs to pay for their entire country with that. But more importantly, for Vladimir Putin, like any dictator, this has to cover the cost of the oligarchy. This has to cover the cost of the elites. This has to keep people on his side. Loyalty in Russia does not come for free. It does not come for ideology. It comes for cash. And today, Vladimir Putin has a lot less of it to dole out. But that's why we see something else happening that's highly unusual. Today we are watching Russia's biggest property redistribution since the 1990s. In fact, the Prosecutor General's office claims to have seized over $54 billion in assets. An incredible figure from that, though, is that about $28 billion came from Forbes-listed billionaires. So today they are taking all the money they can. Anything that's not nailed down can become somebody else's. And the reason is simple: there is less money to steal from the state. And so now they must steal from each other. But there's another factor here that's incredibly important. Some might ask, if it is also bad in Russia, if the economy is doing terribly, why do they continue this war? Why don't they just stop it? We have to understand that the war continuing, it protects some of the elites because it makes sure that there will not be accountability. It also keeps the society mobilized and busy, and it makes sure that the information will be controlled. But the war continuation also keeps budget flows and emergency contracts alive, and that funds patronage. That buys loyalty. And all of this happens as pressure is raising for the Russians. Which reminds me, there's a way that you can add to the Kremlin's problems. Check out the first pinned comment below with a question of the day, and right next to it, a video that you should check out so you understand how bad the Kremlin situation is. But right below that, you'll see how you too can help the Ukrainian soldiers get life-saving drones and other equipment to win. We saw just earlier this month that India's Coast Guard seized 3 Russian tankers off of Mumbai. Now, this is something that will obviously affect the ship owners. This will increase the cost of the oil, which in which case means that the Russians are going to lose more money. But all these increases of cost, Russia still makes a buck. But it's not enough to keep everyone happy. And that's why inside of Moscow, the people there are watching carefully what will happen next. And there are a few names that keep coming up as to who will likely take Putin's seat. That includes people like Alexei Dyumin. He's, of course, very important. He's not a politician, he's definitely more of an enforcer, but he comes from Vladimir Putin's personal security circle. In fact, Vladimir Putin at one point appointed him to be the governor of Tula, but his power base is in the state council, where he is. Being a presidential aide allows him to be close to Putin as well. Being close to Putin, of course, is very important in the world of Putin. But someone who's even more competitive, and I think more likely to get the job, is Dmitry Patrushev. Now, Patrushev is there for one reason alone, and it's not because he's the deputy prime minister. It's not because he was the minister of agriculture, or that his current lover is the current minister of agriculture, and that together they're raiding the bank there for money in order to fund their lifestyle. It's not for any of those reasons. It's because his father, Nikolai Patrushev, ran the Security Council of Russia for years. But even more importantly, his father has known Vladimir Putin from the KGB since the 1970s. When you have that sort of relationship with Vladimir Putin, you're allowed special access. But you're someone that Vladimir Putin trusts. He knows you. In fact, he probably knows Dmitry since Dmitry was born. But another character that comes up a lot is Boris Kovalchuk. Now, what's so interesting about him is that he's in charge of the accounts chamber. That means that he has oversight of budgets and outlays, where the government's money goes, which also means that he can launch investigations. He can freeze budgets. So with someone like him nearby, he's paying very close attention to who's getting what money. But he also knows who needs to be frozen out to preserve his own power, who has money that can be shaken out of their pockets still. He is in one of the best positions for getting wealthy today inside of Russia. And in fact, he is. But some might ask, how about the military? Aren't they producing somebody who will likely lead Russia? The reality is that the military is not a serious contender right now. The best bet they had was Shoigu, the former Minister of Defense. Now, of course, aside from being the Minister of Defense and being on the Security Council, he was removed from most important jobs after the Prigozhin uprising. That didn't go over very well. But it's also because, let's face it, Russia was already many months into the 3-day special military operation, losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and Shoigu, who did not come from a military background, had no idea what to do. That sort of discredited him before the rest of the country. So he's to the side. But of the 3 major names that we've discussed, they all have a shot at it. And a lot of things will depend on how what we're seeing right now with the tightening of budgets plays out. The more resources that Oligarch has, it's not just because they like to count their money. You might ask, why did somebody have $15 billion, but they want $17 billion? It's very simple. That's ammunition. It's a war chest. They all understand that one day, when Putin is no longer around to be the referee, that there will be a fight for power. There'll be a fight for money. There'll be a fight for who owns what industries. And the only way to win that fight is being able to outspend your opponent. And not just on the legal cost, but hiring your own soldiers. That's what they're preparing for. In fact, they have private military companies, many of these oligarchs, to protect their assets. once Putin leaves power. So the situation in Russia is pretty grave. It's not light, but there is a specific type of silence that we're seeing right now. And it's a silence that happens in the Kremlin right before a major shift. We are seeing it at this moment. The Russian elite are no longer behaving like a unified front. They are positioning, they are jockeying, they're consolidating, and they're preparing for succession scenarios that don't include the current status quo. And in a system built on one man, the moment the inner circle begins to hedge their bets, the system has already changed. This is the power struggle that will define the next decade of global security. But what's incredible about it is that side of Russia today, with the leadership, knowing how bad the situation is, knowing how difficult it is, they're behaving just the way they are. Remember, the war in Ukraine was never about Ukraine. It's because of domestic reasons inside of Russia. There are objectives that Moscow has that are only known to those inside of Moscow. The inner elites, the constituents of Vladimir Putin, the only people whom he worries about keeping happy. But those people today aren't very happy. They realize that things are not going well. We see that within 500 meters or 1,600 feet of the Russian border, Ukrainian troops are taking more territory. We see that Ukraine is doing more sabotage. And at the same time, within Russia, things are not going well. Entire swaths of the country are losing electricity and heating. And that's something that's not even due to Ukraine. It's due to the poor leadership of Vladimir Putin. However, be sure, the people in the upper leadership aren't paying that much attention to the war in Ukraine. They pay attention to it when it becomes a problem for them. But in their day-to-day lives, it probably doesn't cross their minds very much. There's something else they think about, though, a lot. And that's about who their relatives are. In fact, there was recently a report by Projekt which analyzed 1,300 top officials inside of Russia. It also analyzed 8,000 of their relatives. What it found was that to be senior inside of Russia, you have to be related to somebody. In fact, 84% of state deputies have relatives in public administration or state contracted businesses. Senior administration jobs get allocated only through friends or through family. In fact, 74% of senior presidential administration officials have family ties within the government apparatus. The regional elites are no better. 86% of Federation Council members have relatives in government service. And this pattern is pretty common. We see it everywhere. 76% of senior officials have relatives connected to the state. So some might wonder, how about Vladimir Putin's relatives? Where are they in the pecking order? Will they make it to the top? Most likely they won't. And the reason is, once again, quite simple. They don't come from the right background. They're very good at making money. They're very good at embezzling money, undoubtedly. But to take the top, you have to be tight with the intelligence services and the military. Now, the military today is being decapitated. It doesn't have a lot of strength. And because of that, the intelligence services are the ones that call the shots. But the intelligence services, of course, get along with Putin, given that he's a former FSB director and a former KGB officer. But it's not just because they're friendly. It's because they work together in the same business. Remember, the FSB is ultimately a business. It operates globally and deals in illegal trades. And the reason is simple. It produces wealth. And producing that wealth, everybody gets a cut, especially the guy at the top. But none of the relatives of Putin are involved in that world. He's given them very plum jobs, but those are jobs that will die the day that Putin leaves office. So very likely we would see Putin's relatives trying for a mass exodus in the post-Putin era. They're not going to stick around and wait for somebody to take away their assets. But for Vladimir Putin himself, he is watching this carefully, and he knows that 2026 and the elections that are coming up are going to be a major moment to shake things up inside of the Kremlin. Whoever comes out on top, that'll be a very clear signal as to what the post-Putin era is really going to look like. But right now, there's already the signs. The most important part of it, though, is that you have to make sure you follow the money. Undoubtedly, 2026 will be an important year for the Kremlin because there's elections coming up. And of course, those are not free nor democratic. And so we will have a very good idea who they're thinking should be some of the next leaders of the country based upon who wins or who they decide will not win. But following the money will be the most key thing in anticipating all of this. Check out this video to understand why. Thank you, as always, for supporting Ukraine.